This is on memory, borderlands and war, with a wonderful lineup of speakers and also a good colleague. So again, let me stress that it's a great pleasure. I would suggest that I will just very briefly introduce the speakers by their name and affiliations without a longer introduction for the sake of time. But of course, if you would wish to say something which is important for you or for the presentation, please don't hesitate to add. And our first talk will be given by three speakers, a wonderful trio. Nina Parish from University of Stirling, David Clark from University of Cardiff, and Weronika Czyżewska-Ponstyliusz, whom today I don't need to introduce to you anymore, but anyway, from Borderland Foundations. And please, floor is yours. Please remember you have 20 minutes.
Thank you very much, Joanna. So mindful of the 20 minutes, no significant preliminaries. This is a paper, obviously, we've already written for the volume that's coming out of the conference. I'm just going to run you through the theoretical kind of context and the research question. I'm going to hand over to Nina and Veronica, who will talk about the case studies. So our title is slightly changed, Performing Agonism is our title, but with a question mark. So we're looking at the Sena Chronicles and Mouche, Sweet Mouche. That will be explained what they are in a moment. So our starting point is really a review of agonistic theories of peace and peace building. Theories of agonistic peace building offer alternatives to more traditional peace building approaches which focus on the creation of a new consensus and reconciliation founded on consensus rather than dissensus. Although we've perhaps used a fairly narrow definition of agonism in this project at times, theorists of agonism use a whole range of different formulations, ranging from what you might call a fairly minimal form of agonism, so focusing merely on non-violent coexistence without dialogue, all the way up to a more dialogistic form based on the work of Chantal Mouffe. So we're interested to see particularly how theatre and peace building can perhaps create modes of agonistic engagement. But a lot of the literature that focuses on arts and peace building, and particularly on theatre and peace building, while noting its potential to broaden approaches to peace building, does tend to follow a consensual model. So the idea is to create a new shared story. The focus is very often on theatre's power to uncover experiences of others, to elicit empathy for those experiences, reimagine relationships in a consensual way in a shared future. So our line of argument is to think then about how engagement in theatre practice might encourage agonistic forms of encounter. And the term that we're inserting into this debate is that of the community of practice, based on the work of the educational theorist Etienne Wenger. Wenger talks about communities of practice emerging through joint enterprises that demand mutual engagement and development of shared repertoires, leading to ongoing negotiation of meanings. But this is not necessarily a consensus-focused process. As Wenger says, a community of practice is neither a haven of togetherness nor an island of intimacy insulated from political and social relations. Disagreement, challenges, and competition can all be forms of participation. And we're exploring these ideas through looking at two different theatre projects, Mouche, Sweet Mouche, which is was an Armenian-Turkish project, and then the Sena Chronicles, which we've already heard about, is based here in Krasnogruda and Sena. And the fieldwork was conducted in the two countries, mainly based on interviews, but we also drew on publications and video recordings of the performances. And I hand over now to Nina, who's going to talk about the Sena Chronicles.
Thank you. Thank you, David. Are you happy keeping going with the slides? Great, thank you. Okay, so this is slightly daunting, speaking about the Chronicles when I've got several participants in it and, yeah, the founders in the room. So wish me luck. So it started in 1999, and this goes back already to what Christoph was saying earlier about perform something happening over time. Okay, so this duration is super important. It's been performed by 5 different generations of 12 to 15-year-olds, and that is important to that age group. It's all about local memory work, and it's carried out by Krzysztof, Małgorzata, Bożena, and Wojciech, who, as you said earlier on the tour of the foundation, arrived here in the early 90s, and it was really with the aim of doing work with local communities. So we've heard about the Borderlands Centre. You're going to see it for those of you who haven't seen it already. So it's located in what was the Jewish district of Senya, and we'll go to hear a performance by the Klezmer Orchestra tomorrow night. There's lots of things that happened that are linked to this Jewish population that disappeared, that was disappeared, I would say. I'm going to leave the publication of Neighbours. I'd love to talk about that. Ask me a question about that. Okay, so this Borderlands, this disappearance of the Jewish population is the obvious one for outsiders in a way, but there are many historical instances of ethnic violence, and between the Polish and the Lithuanian people as well throughout the 20th century. Now, these divisions were further hardened following in the 1920s and the 1930s, and then during Soviet times by the People's Republic of Poland. So, here I have a quote here, so I quote, "This incapacitated the borderland communities and deepened regional ethnic divisions, pushing ethnic minorities into cultural ghettos. This was fertile ground for an outburst of ethnic stereotypes and prejudices which could not be confronted and therefore proved difficult to overcome." Okay, so they arrived in the 1990s and discussed, reflected upon a crisis of multiculturalism, and if you know Krzysztof's work a little bit, this comes from his work on Bosnia, for which the borderland experience, so what's happening here, could provide a solution as a space of transition and coexistence. So it's all about remembering the neglected multicultural past of Senya, but it's for the local communities to take these on as their own. So these are their memories as well, okay? So it acknowledges that the shared past also contains, not good memory, unhealthy memory, misunderstood identity, false ideologies, and traditions infected with blind pain or a disastrous sense of superiority in the primitive instinct of domination. But what it aims to do, and we've heard a lot about this already, is this idea of good memory, okay? So an attitude, I'm quoting here again, that values good neighbourhood over manifestations of a separate identity, okay? This is in order to establish an authentic community, which again, Krzysztof was linking with this idea of love earlier, okay? So, the plays. So you'll know already that this group of practitioners all have a background in avant-garde theatre, yeah? So when I was learning about the Chronicles, I just thought, oh, they did plays because that's what they were into, that was their field of expertise, but not at all, and I think that's super interesting. It begins with doing local oral history with local communities. So that might be members of the Polish, Lithuanian, Russian Old Believer communities, and it involved young people in this from the word go too. So sending young people into these communities, into people's houses to talk to them about the past. So these oral histories, these narratives led to the creation of a map, which then led to the creation of what you can see on the screen, so this large baked clay model, which is at the centre of the play. Yeah, so it sits in the middle of the stage every evening when the play is performed. So the play represents a multiplicity of stories, and it uses a multiplicity of different means as well. So there's dancing, there's singing, there's trumpet playing, there's chanting prayers, and there's different languages as well, okay? It's very intimate, So there's about 30 people in the audience. There's at most 12 people on stage. And at the end of the play, the performers approach the audience and tell them stories either to individuals or to small groups. So yeah, it's a potentially uncomfortably intimate experience. So what is it trying to do? And again, here I'm quoting Christoph yet again. It became like a local community story, a small epic poem which had been lacking before. The situation of our society here in Senja was one of people living together without a common story. I'm not talking about history, I'm talking about a story that people can understand as their local epic, as a roof over their heads. They can find themselves in a common house. So it's this idea, which we've started exploring already, of a shared space with a shared language, okay? And this, in its very nature, is optimistic, it's forward-looking, okay? And to keep going, it has to be optimistic and forward-looking. 5 generations of young people have participated in this. So to be optimistic and forward-looking as well, it has to constantly evolve, okay? So you've got the original stories, these oral histories that were first carried out when this group arrived in this area, but every time, every new generation, something new is introduced, okay? So these could be new stories from participants' families, but also formal innovations as well. So animation films or historical card games are some such examples. So the point of the Chronicles is this idea of a bottom-up approach. So we're coming from these oral histories, working with young people, but it is with a focus on consensus building, okay? So this shared space, shared language, shared past. It places multiple identities in the context of, and I'm quoting again here, the image of the borderland as a cultural phenomenon that surpasses the historically ethnic borders present in all the local communities of the area. There are elements that could be seen as agonistic when we're thinking about performing agonism in our title. The open-endedness of it, this evolving nature of it, of this community of practice, and also this focus on a polyphony of perspectives, okay? But ultimately, it is about finding this shared space, shared language. It's a consensus that they're looking for, yeah? There's not dissensus within these different perspectives, and that came through in all the interviews I conducted here, that everyone shares in this narrative, this forward-looking, optimistic narrative about this local community, okay? So that's whistle-stop tour through the Chronicles, and I'm going to pass on to Veronica, who's going to talk to us about Mouche Sweet Mouche.
Yes, and I'm also in a very difficult position because Lucina is here with us, the creator of the program, so I need some luck too in doing that. So our second study case is a Mouche Sweet Mouche program, which emerged from the much broader initiative named Speaking to One Another, and it was conducted through 4 years, since 2009 to 2013. We decided to focus particularly on Mouche Sweet Mouche part because, as you know, we were very much interested in the performance part, and this is the part when the performance happened. So for you to just get the context of the program, so it was led by Luzine, who was head of DVV Armenia at that time, with cooperation with Armenian NGO Hazarashen and Armenian Center for Ethnological Studies at National Academy of Sciences and Armenian Actors Union, and was financed by the German government fund. And it was this time of a very special and very short moment of this attempt to normalize the Turkish-Armenian relations in the period of 2007-2009, which is sometimes called the football diplomacy period. So basically it was this attempt to improve relations with an ultimate goal to reopen the common border between Armenia and Turkey, and Zurich protocols, which were signed in 2009 but never ratified, which envisioned this establishment of a joint historical commission on the Armenian genocide issue. So that was the moment when the project started. And after this period, the international organizations kept supporting the initiatives on the dialogue between Turkey and Armenia, and MUSH project can be seen in this framework as well, and the involvement of German government can be seen from this perspective, I mean financial involvement, but also the creators from the very beginning stressed the inspiration of this very specifically German model of history from below, which inspired the design of the program. Which was focusing on using oral history and mapping the two places. And now I will go to these, describing these two places. So first, place is Mush, a place in current Turkey, which was populated by the Armenian community, which was killed during the genocide. Today, majority is a Kurdish population. So that was the first of the chosen places, Mush. And the second one, very significantly, it was a place few villages in Armenia, in Tallinn region, where people from Mush managed to escape and settle. So these two places, the aim was to bring together youngsters from Armenia and Turkey, 10 participants from Armenia, 10 participants from Turkey, and involve them in the oral history work in this attempt of mapping Mush through different narratives, the historical narrative, but also a current, present narrative, and create kind of a new mental maps for the place based on memories and the present and the voices of former inhabitants. So basically challenging also the historical accounts and narratives. How they started to implement it? There were many elements of the project, so many visits, many workshops, and also many different outputs of the whole program. So there was an exhibition, there was a book, there is a film created out of it, and there is also a performance. So we were focusing in our research and in our interviews on this moment when the smaller group of the participants conducting oral history were then transferring it into the theater performance. How they were doing it. So at first, intuitively, we thought that they were just, transforming the oral stories that they heard into the fictional performance scenes, but actually that was not the case. So the oral histories that they collected are present in the performance in the form of quotations or some audiovisual materials as well. But the main scenes are built around the experiences of the participants who are collecting the stories. So it's more about the way they encounter the oral history than the oral history itself. The main director of the performance was a director from the Actors Union, but the work was designed also in this way that there was one tutor from Armenia and one tutor from Turkey working with them. the Armenian tutor was stressing this approach that the participants, students, were treating their bodies as a recorder. So they were not only recording the words, but also everything around. So the smells, the sounds, the emotions that kind of surrounded the whole encounter and collecting the stories. What is interesting about it is the process, how the final script and the performance was created, and the fact that there were actually two separate performances. So the performance in Mush and the performance in Armenian villages, they differed, firstly because of the language, but also the content. Oh, okay, sorry. Okay. So that was about the performance. There is a second very important source for us, which was the film made during the whole process, which is an amazing source for the questions about how this agonistic encounter actually worked, because the film focused on the reflection sessions that were happening after each day of the work, and it was actually a space when participants were sharing all the emotions and processes happening within the group. How much time do I have? 1 minute. Okay, so let's go to the conclusions then. I'm really sorry.
That's absolutely fine. I shall skip ahead to the conclusions. It's all in the text. It's all in the text. You'll be able to read. But to say very briefly what the conclusions were, Nina talked about the very sort of consensus-focused approach of the Sena Chronicles. What we found actually with the Mush Sweet Mush project was that, in a way, what the Armenian participants were kind of expecting of the Turkish participants was that they would sort of learn to acknowledge the genocide and say this was genocide. Yeah. That is not what the Turkish participants in the main did. Some did, some didn't. So they all had kind of different perspectives on the genocide. Some wanted to use the word genocide, others didn't. And this came out in the process of developing the performance. And that came, I think, to be sort of accepted within the group, that there were these different positions which could be taken. None of them were denialist positions, I have to say. Nobody in the project from the Turkish side was denying genocide. But what we did see there was that in that community of practice, at least for that moment, it did seem possible for a kind of agonistic encounter to take place, because the central issue was kind of what had happened in 1915-16, but people were taking up different kind of positions on it in a shared space in which they learned to kind of acknowledge the existence of those different perspectives. So I think that probably sums it up.
And then please, Nelly and Tomasz, the floor is yours. Okay, so as you will be putting your PowerPoint on, and I will just briefly introduce you. Tomasz Rawski is assistant professor at the University of Warsaw, and Nelly Manchurian is a researcher at the Armenian Academy of Science, and they did a wonderful project together, reading the street art, and this is what we'll learn from them.
So in our case, and now we're trying to launch the presentation. Perfect. Thank you so much. I think we will manage with this. So that's the title of our presentation. So what we did actually was that we did a research on contemporary street art related to memory of the Warsaw Uprising in Poland and the Nagorno-Karabakh Wars, particularly the Second Nagorno-Karabakh War in Armenia. And I'm not going to say many things about the approach. Our approach is a processual, relational approach, which looks at street art and at street artists as bottom-up memory makers who develop their positions, their narratives, and then their ways of doing war-related street arts vis-a-vis official hegemonic discourses, hegemonic modes of memory, which we have in both countries, Poland and Armenia, which are to some extent different from each other. We can discuss the differences, but what is very important is that they both, at the same time, they have this core of antagonistic frameworks, which is very similar. So at the very center of both hegemonic memories, we have this logic of heroism and martyrdom, right? According to which the national past, Polish or Armenian, consists of a series of heroic struggles of the nations against stronger external enemies. So the nations repeatedly do it in the defense of their homeland. And this is basically throughout all the history, the struggle is the same, but the enemies change depending on the historical context. And the essence of the antagonistic potential here is this highly polarized division into evil them and good us, a hardly negotiable or almost non-negotiable division. So we look at how street artists deal with this on a bottom-up level, and our two research questions, you can see it on the slide. So first we looked at how war-related street art reinforces or challenges the official discourses, and then we tried to look, are there any pathways to agonism among these different ways? So about methodology.
Yes, thank you. So a few words about the methods and data collection. Actually, while starting doing the field work in Armenia, Tomek faced with quite a big challenge because we didn't have, there was no systematized, documented some collection or database on murals related to Karabakh War, first and second. But on the opposite, for Warsaw, for Polish case, I found quite great data kept preserved in the virtual scope. So it was quite easy for me to somehow deal with it. And of course, we have done our field work during from September, like June and September of 2022. In Armenia, we had Gyumri and Yerevan because of some, important, as a major, basically major cities which kept the memory in terms of murals. And in Warsaw, and I did field work, the interviews with artists, muralists, in Warsaw. So perhaps this much.
Thank you. So in the article, you can read the blended analysis, but what we're going to do now, it's to present our cases, right? So with the Armenian case, basically, roughly speaking, we have two trends among war-related street art. War-related, which doesn't necessarily mean commemorative, right? So I would say the activist trend, which has been challenging not only hegemonic memories, but hegemonic political discourse of Armenia drifting towards authoritarianism before 2018. So it was articulated first in 2008, and then the commemorative trend, which focused on like strictly commemorative street art, mostly. Let's say, painting realistic portraits of the soldiers who were killed in 2020 Nagorno-Karabakh war, painted on the walls in public spaces and urban spaces. Whoever went to Armenia, you obviously must have seen these. And it was for the first time articulated in 2016. But so these early developments are important, but and they are here. But what I'm going to focus now, it's the development after the 2020 war, because although this first activist trend, people who used mainly stencils and political colleges to conduct political and artistic struggle against the Karabakh clan, the power of Karabakh clan, they were more powerful as a trend visible, present in the public space until the 2020 war. But after the 2020 war, the situation changed. It shifted because so many, like Armenia had so many victims, so many killed soldiers during this war, that a very big social demand, and we emerged, a very big social demand emerged for such portraits. So basically these portraits, which you can see here, and the battle scenes also, are, can we see it very well? Yes. Okay, so they are basically painted because of the social demand of family members who wanted the artists to paint the portraits. So the story of these trend of these artists is that they are actually very embedded in social networks who like turn to them to do this for the families, for the friends, for the let's say acquaintances and so on. So they obviously earn money on it, and they obviously like make their own profits. But this is basically a very broad demand which they are trying to cope with, and that's this commemorative trend I roughly call the reinforcers of the hegemonic discourse. Maybe at the end I could tell more exactly what they reinforce and how they reinforce. What you can see on that slide are two types of portraits. On your left-hand side, you can see a minimalist portrait of a fallen soldier, and on your right-hand side, that's what I call a maximalist portrait. Maximalist in terms of exposing national symbolism and military symbolism connected to the very people who lost their lives. And below you can see also a battle scene. This is a let's say a minor type of art as part of this trend. It is important because whereas the soldiers' portraits are mostly the portraits of common soldiers, common people, ordinary people who are not like cultural symbols or whatever, in the battle scenes we more often see like more canonical figures. For example, here on this battle scene on your right-hand side, you can see Monte Melkonian standing, who is a hero of the first Karabakh war for the Armenians and is actively challenged by the Azerbaijani and Turkish as a terrorist. So this symbolism somehow blends in the battle scenes, that the cultural symbols are blended with the like ordinary people. And the other thing I would like to say, so the activist trend, the challengers are those who continue using political stencil and political collage also today, but not only, they also were witnessing new, more experimental street art initiatives. And you can see two at this slide, but I will tell only about one because I'm not sure about the time. So I would like to say about what you can see on the right. This example is the project that is called Post-War Butterflies, and it's created by Siranush Akhayanyan, who is with us also today and will participate in the later discussion. So this project refers to the old regional tradition of mosaic art, which is the heritage of all Caucasian societies, not only Armenian societies. And Siranush created 5 mosaic butterflies of different size on the walls in Yerevan, most of them, and in Stepanakert. So the bigger one was created, which you can see was created in Stepanakert. And so although she used a strong reference to the Armenian variety of a mosaic, so with natural motifs like birds and you know, other animals are characteristic for the Armenian mosaic, but at the same time, this is a kind of a form that it's readable and friendly also for non-Armenian viewer, right? And here the creative process is also very important because Cyrano composed her butterflies, as she told me, from fragments of broken ceramics of various kinds. For example, typical decorative ceramics and old Soviet tiles, which was previously used in apartments for practical purposes and so on. So what she did was she assembled the shattered elements of objects that were at that time separate objects into one new coherent whole equipped with a clear, cohesive message, rebirth of life and love after the war. So we can read this creative process as an agonistic metaphor, right? It could be an agonistic metaphor for a desired dynamics of relations in the regions, which could maybe move from today's separateness, divisions, particularisms, to the mutual co-creation of a new, more inclusive future in all regional societies. So the largest and most colorful butterfly, which you can see on the right, was created in Stepanakert. And this is where I put full stop to my case and will give floor to Nelly.
Thank you. So how much time is left? Okay. Yes, here you can see the distribution of Warsaw Uprising related murals in Warsaw. Just few, yeah. Well, well, a few words about Polish street art in general. I mean, it had been widely discussed, and it was considered to be as the non-institutionalized typical guerrilla art from bottom up, but started from the middle 2000 when public institution became more interested in creating and financing of promoting street art events such as festivals of, for instance, street art doping in Warsaw. It gradually started. I mean, it gradually became more institutionalized and commercialized, which produced different consequences. So the early and middle 2000s was the time when war-related street art became very famous. And especially Warsaw Uprising was under very, very important focus. And you can see that among 90 Second World War-related murals, a significant majority, like 79, were specifically dedicated to Warsaw Uprising. So only 3 were centered on a general topic of World War II, and only 6 were connected to Warsaw Ghetto Uprising leaders, and 2 were dedicated to Holocaust topic. Yeah, here you can see the distribution, and just to say that the first mural was created in 2003, and there were also the so-called cursed soldier portraits of individuals participating during anti-communist movement, and just yes. You need, I think that we need to understand why especially Warsaw Uprising topic was of great importance for Warsavians. It somehow localized this local memory, kept this more narrow local memory in terms of Second World War, because it should be mentioned that tradition of writing on the walls occur right during the years of Nazi occupation of Warsaw in 1944. And what is important, it's Konbunsky said that especially during these years, these spontaneously inscriptions had been done both as an individualist action and of course something which had been thought in a wider from wider society. And but what is interesting is that in the early and middle 2000s, especially after the rise of right-wing political party Law and Justice in Poland, it became somehow a pillar of national identity, one of the pillars of national identity of the Poles. And the celebration of the National Day of Warsaw Uprising was itself turned into the site of memory. And at the same time, these festivals, for example, the street art doping, began to include this Warsaw Uprising topic as a featured content in exhibitions specifically dedicated to the day of the anniversary. So. Yes, so this is one of the very huge mural, which is painted on one of the bridges and painted during this festival. So I will skip. Yes, I will try to say a few words. So here you can see another perspective of showing Warsaw Uprising. Those are painted and created by the football fans of Legia, football Legia team members, and so these are generally not financed by government, but still they exist everywhere. But they don't. I mean, these murals are not considered to be the mainstream. So on the contrary, here you can see the art wall on the backyard of Warsaw Uprising Museum, and it had been. I mean, it is a quite famous place for. It was a quite famous place for muralists to do and to present their work there. So some very interesting phenomena which I want to mention about are the so-called traveling murals or altered murals. Here we can talk about political connotations of. Yes, in the first picture you can see the monstrous, huge mural depicting Soviet or communist figure, fighting with so-called cursed soldier, but gradually during 2021, this mural had been removed and replaced with a rather more neutral and more let's say, non-politicized version of the same hero of Witold Pilecki, depicting his four stages of his life. And a few words about Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. So, on the contrary with this mainstream Warsaw Uprising thematic, here we see this very permanent, like they last just 14 days. It's in the center of Warsaw, but each year the famous mural artists paint these ghetto uprising murals, but their lifespan is quite short. So perhaps, yeah.
We are already at the conclusions. Okay, so we have some common conclusions, like for both cases. But before we go to that, maybe we'll present like the separate ones. So I already told you about the reverse balance of power between trends after 2020 war. The second interesting conclusions is about reinforcers. So how do they reinforce? So with this, let's say, sharp division between us and them, what they do is actually not creating openly antagonistic street art, openly like working on this division between us and them, but only focusing on us. So they are much more often inward oriented. They focus on embracing national solidarity, on preserving the social bonds between local communities, and they preserve the cohesion of the Armenian society after the war, which when it's done in the national framework can be, of course, interpreted as like delivering the raw material for the political elites to start not only working on us, but also to add them, and not only start. So what the artists do, they consolidate, but obviously this job can be viewed also from the perspective that they make national community ready for antagonizing the enemy, and they keep the national community mobilized, right? So this is an ambivalent role, what they do. And what the challengers or activists do, they do two things. So I told you about one example, which is actually an example of how these challengers look for alternatives, right? So what Cyranus did, in my opinion, was trying to take a step towards agonistic perspective, towards creating a symbolic space which could be like used and shared, interpreted by everyone from the same core, like symbolic core, regardless of their origin. But there is also a lot of challengers, activists focused mostly on denouncing, challenging politically the discourse. So they are not very much oriented towards alternatives, but to struggling with the discourse. Thank you.
Okay, so just a few words. In Polish case, we have somehow, a bit different picture. Our empirical data highlights the fact that mural artists, in spite of this highly governmental and institutionalized procedure of making murals, they try to somehow neutralize this, sharp corners of this highly political and highly nationalistic narratives. And as I've been told during the interviews, that we tried to somehow regain our victory and took from this nationalistic, right-wing discourse, and trying to somehow keep, having the orders from some governmental and official organization, trying to keep the balance between this mainstream, let's say, nationalists narratives. So I think, yes, this much. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was the last minute of our presentation, so here we stop.
That mural artists, in spite of this highly governmental and institutionalized procedure of making murals, they try to somehow neutralize this, sharp corners of this highly political and highly nationalistic narratives. And as I've been told during the interviews, that we tried to somehow regain our victory and took from this nationalistic, right-wing discourse, and trying to somehow keep, having the orders from some governmental and official organization, trying to keep the balance between this mainstream, let's say, nationalist narratives. So I think, yes, this much. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was the last minute of our presentation, so here we stop.
Now I hope that you can see illustrations of what I was talking about, monuments that are being repainted in multiple colors. And this is very important for our story because it's evidence of continued respectful interaction with war memorials. So where one of the points of justification in Russian propaganda for the invasion of Ukraine was that supposedly people in Ukraine are no longer interested in Soviet memorials to the Great Patriotic War, and they're in a completely dilapidated state, or worse, they're even being actively destroyed. Here you can see multiple examples of people actually respectfully interacting with them in their own way, for example, by repainting them. Other forms of respectful interaction are to add vernacular elements, such as, for example, these kind of grassroots eternal flames that people add post factum to existing memorials. And they also modify existing symbols. So, for example, a formerly red Soviet flag is being repainted in the colors of the Ukrainian flag. A Soviet medal is being replaced with a medal in the colors of the Ukrainian nationalist underground in the Second World War. What people also do is that they add individual names to lists of names on collective graves. So here, for example, you see a list of names of people buried in this communal grave from the Second World War, and someone at the very end added someone from the anti-terrorist operation against Russia starting in 2014. The dates 1941 to 45, which correspond to the old Soviet canon of the Great Patriotic War, are replaced with the new Ukrainian chronology of 39 to 45, etc., etc. People add religious symbols. Here you can see an icon. People add vernacular offerings that sometimes have to do with Orthodox or Catholic Christian ceremonies of commemoration, but sometimes really are more reminiscent of pagan ceremonies, such as vodka or fruit or candy placed on top of memorials. So there's a very, very rich form of interaction. And memorials are also being individualized. For example, when once again on a monument atop a communal grave, people affix an individual portrait of someone who was buried here along with his comrades. And this is often done by surviving families. People use paint to highlight a particular name, etc., etc. I will skip over other examples. So this is an important layer of the prehistory. So what happens now once Russia invades in February 2022? So one thing that happens is that monuments get destroyed. And in part, this happens in the form of collateral damage, so it's unintentional. Many of you will have seen examples of Holocaust memorials, for example, at the infamous Babin Yar site in Kyiv being damaged by a Russian missile strike. A similar thing happened to the largest Holocaust memorial just outside Kharkiv at the Drobytsky Yar site. And another case that circulated quite a lot in Ukrainian social media was when in Bucha, as the Russians were coming in, they saw a monument that commemorates local people who were killed in the Soviet-Afghan war in the 1980s in the form of an armored vehicle placed on a pedestal. They mistook it for an active tank, so they shelled it because they thought that they were actually fighting a tank. But there are also cases of memorials to the Great Patriotic War in different parts of Ukraine being destroyed unintentionally in the Russian onslaught. And in addition, there are also some cases, I don't think I have an image here, of such damage being intentional, in particular when there are inscriptions present in the Ukrainian language that some Russian soldiers take offense to. But much more systematically, there is damage and destruction of more recent Ukrainian war memorials, specifically those that have Ukrainian symbols, such as the Ukrainian trident or the Ukrainian flag, and especially those that commemorate the so-called anti-terrorist operation, so Ukrainian resistance against the Russian invasion starting in 2014. Here you can see such monuments being deliberately destroyed, in this case rammed using an armored vehicle. you can see commemorative plaques to individual Ukrainian soldiers who died in the anti-terrorist operation also being destroyed. There are cases when a village or town changes hand multiple times. So in the village of Luhansk in the Donetsk region, a village was taken by the Russians. A local monument to the famous opera singer and volunteer fighter on the Ukrainian side, Vasyl Slipak, was first simply toppled. Then the Ukrainians retook the village. Then the Russians took it back again from them, and they not only destroyed but removed the entire monument. So there's an entire monuments war going on that often proceeds in several stages. What local Ukrainians often do in order to protect the monuments is that they cover them, for example, in this case with black PE foil, simply so that it sort of symbolically disappears from public space, so that it no longer features in Russian propaganda videos, and the Russians in those cases often no longer see the need to physically destroy these memorials. And then often when these places are liberated again by the Ukrainian side, these covers are simply taken down and the memorial stays in place. Other interesting cases that we found are memorials that are being toppled by the Russian invaders, but which are then taken to relatively safe spaces. So here in Kherson itself, in the so-called Park of Glory, there was a stele that commemorated local residents who gave their lives for Ukraine. This was taken down apparently by local municipal workers at the behest of the Russian occupiers, but instead of just dumping it into the Dnipro River, which is just next to the park, they took it to a cemetery 5 kilometers away and placed it so that you can read the inscription, and even placed flowers on it. Other cases also involve a multi-layered monument war. So in many places where, starting in 2015, Ukrainians toppled Lenin statues that were there from Soviet times and replaced them with their own war memorials, often commemorating centuries of resistance, or what is seen as centuries of resistance against Russian rule. The Russian invaders then come back in, remove these monuments, and sometimes replace them with the old Lenin statues, or simply remove them altogether and leave an empty pedestal. And this is what I was talking about before. Sometimes even Soviet-era memorials to the Great Patriotic War are damaged, as you can see here, shot at, simply due to the existence of a Ukrainian language inscription. Sometimes Russian symbols, such as the infamous Z and V symbols, are painted over existing memorials to the anti-terrorist operation. But these changes all happen in stages. So it's not like the Russians come in and immediately destroy everything. Very often they lack the resources to do so because, of course, the war is continuing on multiple fronts. So sometimes what they do is they simply attach a makeshift sign to an existing memorial, kind of trying to give a neo-Soviet or Soviet nostalgic spin to the site. And there are many sites where many months, even a year and a half into the invasion, you can still see memorials that bear Ukrainian symbols. And often this is because these sites are far from the main routes that the invasion took. And the Russian military presence in those sites is actually comparatively light. In a few cases, the Russians claim that they will not simply destroy the Ukrainian memorials, but place them in a more peripheral, less prominent place in order to sort of museify them instead of destroying them altogether. But we only found one place where that was actually done, where a plaque commemorating the anti-terrorist operation was indeed removed from a central square in Chornobaivka and placed in a less prominent location. Much more often there is extremely aggressive and derogatory language, as you can see here, I won't read this out, directed against Ukrainian memorials, which are seen as somehow false, inauthentic, ugly, and in need of destruction or replacement by older Soviet symbols or newer Russian symbols. Another interesting aspect is to think about which monuments are spared. And in Kherson, for example, throughout the entire duration of the Russian occupation, there was a makeshift memorial created as early as spring 2022 to members of the territorial defense. So this is a paramilitary formation that includes civilians aiding the army in the defense against Russia. So a memorial to members of the territorial defense who were killed during the Russian onslaught on Kherson was created in a place called the Lilac Grove. And perhaps counterintuitively or unexpectedly, the Russians left that intact, even though in the very same site there was a bigger and more official-looking memorial that was blown up with a propaganda video actually made by the Russians about the explosion. As you can see here, this is the very same site. So one memorial gets detonated and the other one stays in place. And we explain this with reference to the fact that while the Ukrainian army, which is commemorated in this memorial, is seen as not simply the enemy, but kind of an embodiment of evil, of nationalism, of Nazism, and everything that all the terminology that Russian propaganda uses against Ukraine, members of the territorial defense are sometimes framed as innocent local citizens who are kind of drafted against their will in the fight against the big brother. Other interesting cases involve memorials to policemen who died in the line of duty. And very often these memorials commemorate local policemen in Ukrainian cities dating back to Soviet times and well into the present. And what's interesting is that these memorials often include among those named as having died in the line of duty people who died fighting Russia, but in their capacity as policemen. And what's interesting is that sometimes you find memorial plaques to a person being deliberately destroyed by the Russian side, whereas in another case, that very same person is commemorated as part of a longer list as a policeman, and that memorial is left intact. And we see this as an expression of something like a corporate solidarity on the part of the Russian forces, who frame Ukrainian policemen as somehow part of the bigger Soviet family. So they kind of have a local identity which can be Sovietized or Russified. It doesn't need to be completely kind of submerged in the bigger Ukrainian identity, even if the memorials include Ukrainian symbols. And here you see one such memorial in Kherson on the left-hand side before the occupation with Ukrainian symbols, and on the right-hand side with Russian soldiers guarding it. Another important level of interaction with memorials in Ukraine by the Russians consists of building or rebuilding memorials, because the propaganda, of course, is that the Ukrainians have neglected or destroyed our old Soviet memorials, so we now have to come in and rebuild them or build them. Now, the problem is that in many cases, as I mentioned before, this is not true. Memorials in Ukraine are extremely well maintained. Festivities such as the Victory Day celebrations for the 9th of May have happened routinely in Ukraine around these memorials, but the Russians often believe their own propaganda. So in a sense, they have to come up with some way for the propaganda videos and photos to demonstrate respectful interaction in a situation when the memorials are actually in a very good shape. So what they often do is they talk about rekindling the eternal flame, or putting an eternal flame where none existed before. And this leads to paradoxical phenomena such as temporary eternal flame. So the symbol of the eternal flame is so important as a symbol of re-Sovietization or Russification, and the discourse about Ukrainians not respecting the eternal flame is such an important part of Russian war propaganda that eternal flames get installed even in places where none were actually part of the original monument design, which leads to things like temporary eternal flames. Another phenomenon we have is what we call spurious reconstruction, is when, once again, a monument is...
You have like 3 up to 4 more minutes.
Okay. Yes, is in very good shape already. And they have to somehow create an image of something being done now that Mother Russia is back, quote unquote, and can do something about the memorial. So very often what happens is that the very vernacular ways of interacting with war memorials that I talked about briefly at the beginning in the prehistory are now, even though this is something that's usually not seen as kosher from a Russian perspective, and something that you would not usually find inside Russia, are now taken up and actually used in Russian propaganda as evidence that now that Russia is back, locals in Ukraine are finally liberated and free to interact with memorials in a respectful manner. So All of these are examples of polychrome repainting that happened after the Russian invasion, and which are then presented in Russian propaganda as something that people spontaneously engage in now for the first time that Russia has liberated them. And you can see here soldiers with individual elements, or statues with individual elements being highlighted in specific colors, and even bronze statues or polymer bronze-like statues are being repainted in multiple colors, which is something, of course, you don't usually do to bronze statues. So here you can see another memorial to the Afghan war in the 1980s in Kherson, where the grieving elderly mother, a bronze statue, has been repainted black, and the icon that she's holding is painted in a gold color. Another thing that the Russians do is that they build new monuments, perhaps surprisingly, given how many resources the invasion itself is consuming. But they're engaging in this very, very actively. One example is, many of you will have heard about this this elderly lady outside Kharkiv who was somehow confused and greeted Russian soldiers with the Soviet flag, and became an important symbol in Russian propaganda that Ukrainians are supposedly greeting the Russian liberators. So a polymer plastic monument to this grandmother with the Soviet flag was installed in destroyed Mariupol, of all places, and then replicated across many other places, both in occupied Ukraine and in Russia. Also in Mariupol, a large Ukrainian memorial to the anti-terrorist operation was destroyed almost immediately after the Russians took the city, and was later replaced within a single month with this gigantic cast iron equestrian statue of Alexander Nevsky, a medieval Russian prince who had nothing to do with the territory of Ukraine, but is seen as a symbol of Russian imperial might. And there is also the theme of monuments being stolen. So, for example, as the Russians left Kherson, they took with them a number of monuments, both from the imperial period and from the Soviet and even the post-Soviet period, commemorating some of the legendary founders of Kherson in the Russian imperial period in the 18th century, arguing that since this is now Russian territory that is being invaded by the Ukrainians, quote unquote, they have to take these monuments back to Russian territory for safeguarding in order to protect them from the Ukrainian side, even though this territory had only been declared part of Russia 3 weeks earlier. Just the very final thing that I want to talk about very briefly is the use of monuments and memorials in visual war propaganda on both sides. And this is an extremely important use, especially on the Russian side, where war memorials are often used as background to provide speakers, to provide Russian soldiers and proxy administrators with additional authority derived from the legitimacy of war memory, regardless of what they're actually speaking about, and to give the speaker kind of an expert position, even though very often you can hear from what they're saying that they don't actually know what this memorial is about. They don't really know where they are. But kind of combining a war memorial with a speaker sort of implicitly gives the speaker greater authority, because they're seen as continuing the great exploits of the generation of the Second World War. And whenever you see war memorials being used in war propaganda, usually you have these low-angle shots that denote hierarchy between the older heroic generation and the new generation of Russian soldiers who are continuing their feats in now once again supposedly liberating Ukraine from Nazis and fascists. You have forms of reenactment of poses of memorials.
Sorry, but 1 more minute to wrap up.
Okay. So this is very common on the Russian side. And just in contrast, I want to show you uses on the Ukrainian side, where memorials are also very often used in war propaganda, but the angles at which they are visually presented are usually very different. Instead of these low angle shots, very often you have horizontal style selfie shots where the speaker is placed on the same level as the memorial. And in fact, the speaker is visually presented as being more important than the memorial, even to the extent that the monument's head is cut off. So in contrast with the Russian hierarchical presentation of the great patriotic war generation being the most important and the contemporary generation having to prove itself worthy of that legacy, in the Ukrainian case, you see a kind of continuity where all are on the same level. And you also see reminiscences or kind of intimations of the whole visual history of iconic photos of monuments from both the First and the Second World War to visually denote Russian destruction of Ukrainian cities. I'll stop here. I have lots more material that I could show you, but maybe if you're interested in specific aspects.
So I will start speaking. I'm presenting the paper, which is also ready, so you will be able to read it afterwards, which was written by the group, consists of 4 people. 2 of them are from Lithuanian side. Thank you for cooperation. And there are also this Polish group, Małgosia and I. So the 4 of us wrote about the images of national groups in Lithuanian and Polish textbooks. And actually, when we started to dig into this material, read textbook, we decided that we focus mainly on the image of Poland and Polish in Lithuanian textbooks and the image of Lithuanians and Lithuania in Polish textbooks. So I will start, and I will start from the quotation from Tomasz Venclova, who is a renowned Lithuanian intellectual and who once wrote that we Lithuanians and Poles can turn even medieval studies into journalism, which is absolutely true because we have this long common history and we can argue about every single event from this our history. And we wanted to check during our analysis, is it like that when it comes to the 20th century history of Polish-Lithuanian relationship? So we did not focus on medieval times, but we focused on the history of 20th century and 21st century. Yeah. So first I will talk about why is it so important to analyze textbook and to read those textbook, and sometimes it's so boring, really, going through the same story over and over again. It's not the most thrilling thing you can do in your life, but still it's very interesting, and actually at the end of the day I really like it. And okay, and then I will show some pictures from our common history, how those events are described by Lithuanian authors and by Polish authors. So what are schools for? Why do we focus on schools, and why is it so important? And I'm not going to tell you that without schools, there is no national state. That without national state, that there are no schools that we know nowadays from our experience. That schools are the schools that we know them now are made to make this common culture to prepare students to be citizens and also the members of the national group from the very beginning. And schools teaches students not only the common language, the common way of behaving, the common culture, but also the common feelings. And I think that the part of the feelings is very important, that we can where we should feel proud, where we should feel ashamed, where we should feel sorry, where we should feel brave, and what we should be proud is the proud is very important feeling in this national system. And it is also important to the question, why is it very important to learn history at school? What the sense in learning and teaching history at schools? And I like the quotation from James Ward, who put it is this way: unlike mathematics, history helps students to become competent and loyal members of the nation state. So sometimes I also think that mathematics helps to be a loyal member of nation state, but history is is made mainly to prepare this a loyal member of a nation state. And what is the main important in my perspective is to create this image of us and to draw this line between us and them and explain who is good and who is bad, and to explain what and to have this prediction what we can expect from them, from our neighbors, and who is good and who is bad. So what is also important when it comes to the analysis of Polish and Lithuanian textbook is the fact that the textbooks in both countries and curricula should be approved by the ministry that supervises the school. So So when we analyze textbooks, we don't only analyze the narration that students learn about the past, but we analyze the narration that the ministry, that government want students to learn about the past. So it's this official narration that is told to students. Okay, and next one. Yeah, no, it's not. Okay, so we were not focused on the school books at mathematics or languages, but we were mainly focused on history school books and social science school books that are used in secondary schools. And we were also interested in the history school books that told students the history starting from 1918. Why is it so important to start in 1918? Because it's the year where both countries regained their independence. After the Second World War, after the 19th century of being not independent country, they started they regained their independence, and we were also interested in the books from so-called social sciences, textbook from social sciences, and in Lithuania this is called Basics of Citizenship, and in Poland it is called the oh, thank you so much. It is called the Knowledge About Society. Okay. And what do we analyze? We analyze we made content analysis, we analyzed the textual materials, the author's text, the source's text, the questions for the students under the text. And we were also interested in iconographic materials, for example, maps, photographs, and illustrations included in the textbooks. So before we start, and before I start telling you about the narrations from textbooks, I'm going to tell you a few words about Lithuania and Poland and our our common history. Please share it with everyone. Yeah, that's true. No more UK, but here are a few maps showing the Polish-Lithuanian relationship throughout the ages, and our friendship, and not only friendship started in 14th century, in 1385, and the map here on the top left side shows the Grand Duchy of Lithuania here, which, as you can see, is pretty big country, and Kingdom of Poland, which is small and it looks like a stripe. And afterwards, they created the one country, or united country, that lasts until 1795. And then after 100 years of being dependent on Austria, Germany, or Russia, both countries regained independence in 1918. And everything started from 1918 because they started to quarrel over Vilnius. And if they couldn't agree if Vilnius is a Polish city or a Lithuanian city, and all started from Vilnius. And I will tell you more about Vilnius afterwards. Eventually, it became a Polish city after so-called rebellion of Polish General Lucjan Żeligowski. And his soldiers took the city in October 1920. And relations between two countries were freezed until 1938. We were like in the state of war for 18 years. And you can see the map of Poland and Lithuania from 1920. And this is the Republic of Central Lithuania that became part of Poland. And in the middle of this republic, there is Vilnius. And you can see the map from nowadays, Poland and Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, and everything. And the map looks like that since 1991, when Lithuania regained independence from, and it's not part of the Soviet Union anymore. Poland joined NATO in 1999, Lithuania 5 years later. Both countries joined the European Union in 2004. And it seems that Lithuanian and Polish relations have never been as good as they are today. And we have several questions. First of all is how during this friendly relationship, this story about hard past is narrated to students. What we tell young people about this past? Is it very important, this quarrel about Vilnius nowadays? Or we just skip this memory, skip this narration? And we also want to know if there anything in this textbooks that can remind us about agonistic memory. If there any symptom of agonistic memory, if history memory, if in textbook if there anything from agonistic memory in history textbooks. And from the very beginning, and I would like to point it and stress it right now, there is nothing as symmetry in the perception of each other country. For Lithuania, Poland is a very important, sometimes a key actor in its recent history, and it is also an enemy of Lithuanian independence. In Polish narratives, Lithuania is almost not existent. It is not a threat, but a minor problem, that minor problematic problem. So for me and for Małgosia, it was very easy to analyze Polish textbook, Polish history textbook, because there was also nothing, almost nothing about Lithuania. And probably for my colleagues, it was much more complicated and much more, they put much more efforts in analyzing textbooks. Okay. So, Poland in Lithuania textbooks, it's an enemy. When they describe this interwar period, this is the enemy country that is a threat. During the interwar period, Lithuania has three main enemies. First of them is Soviet Russia, the second one is Germany, and the third one is Poland. And according to the authors of Lithuanian textbooks, Polish politicians dreamed of restoring this Polish-Lithuanian statehood. They did everything to obstruct Lithuania from regaining the independence, and the proof of the Poles' hostile intentions toward the Lithuanians was the occupation of Vilnius in 1920. And we can read here that all three major neighbors of Lithuania opposed independence and sovereignty, Soviet Russia sought to keep Lithuania under its influence at all costs. Germany plotted to keep Lithuania in power, and Poland openly sought to annex Lithuania and restore the Polish-Lithuanian state. Okay. Okay. And how it happened that Lithuania remained independent state, it happened to the bravery of Lithuanians. And Lithuania is something that was made and prepared by Lithuanians. And it's every Lithuanian person should be proud of this interwar period in Lithuanian history. As we can read, in a very short time, Lithuania changed beyond recognition from a province of the Russian Empire to a state on a par with other European countries of the time. Okay. And we also can read in a textbook that interwar Lithuania was exclusively a national project. The national minorities living in the country are marginalized and little attention is paid to them. And what is also important, that people who consider themselves Polish are not Polish at all, but they are assimilated Lithuanians. It's like they don't know who they are. So Lithuanians knew better, and they wrote. The majority of Polish speakers were Lithuanian origin, some of them without a defined national identity. So even if they speak Polish, they were Lithuanians in their heart and souls. But let's look at this problem, this war over Vilnius from Polish perspective. Relationship between Lithuania and Poland in their interwar period are portrayed in Polish textbooks through the prism of the conflict over Vilnius. This is the most important event from this Polish and Lithuanian history in the 20th century. Nothing is so important as this Vilnius case and Vilnius problems. And this is described as a very complicated drama. And we can even have this feeling reading the textbooks that the authors of the textbooks try to understand a Lithuanian perspective. And for example, we can read the Lithuanian state declared Vilnius its capital, where the Lithuanians saw the historical center of their statehood. So we have this understanding that for Lithuanians it was very important to have Vilnius as its capital, because it is the historical center of Lithuanian state. But then we can read that, no, we know better what is the truth, and read and learn. Vilnius, however, was at the time a city dominated by Poles and Jews. Lithuanians made up only a few % of the population. That's what we can read at one textbook, and the another says, Lithuanians never came to terms with the loss of Vilnius, even though ethnically it was a Polish-Jewish city with a Lithuanian minority, if only about 1%. So, okay, we understand your point of view that this is the historical center, but we know better. What is the most important is that this is Polish-Jewish city, so it should belong to us. So Piłsudski and Żeligowski, they were right when they captured the city. And Polish textbooks also do not analyze the situation of the Lithuanian minority in Poland, as they are not very interested in the situation of minorities if they are not Jews or Germans in this interwar period. And this is one of my favorite quotations from the textbooks, because students can learn that ethnic and religious diversity is a factor that weakens the state. So we read, the large proportion of minorities was an objective factor that weakened the cohesion and strength of the state. Although within each ethnic group there were individuals and circles loyal to the Polish state. Okay, so we know that it's not objectively not good to have minorities in the country. 4 more minutes, okay. The Second World War, Poland in Lithuanian textbooks. The Second World War in this narration in Lithuanian textbooks starts with ultimatum made by Poland, and Polish government wanted to start this relationship, and they made this ultimatum, and in 1938 the relationship between Poland and Lithuania started again. In Lithuanian narration is like the beginning of the Second World War. The first was this ultimatum, then Germany took Klaipeda, and then the Soviet army came to Lithuania. This is very opposite narration in Poland, because in Poland, in Poland, when Lithuania and Poland signed this, started the relationship, Poland could start preparations for the war. So it was like the finishing of this interwar period and the starting preparations for the war. So the perspective is totally different. And what is also interesting, that for Polish textbooks, in Polish textbook, it is very important when that Vilnius became the Lithuanian city, Lithuanians started to Lithuanize Vilnius. And it was never Polish again. And the next one, and Poland in Lithuanian textbooks. Let's look now. This is more important and more interesting. How Lithuania is described when it comes to these events after 1989. Because for the first time we can see that Lithuania and Lithuanians are active actors, and they are agents, and they are people that we can look at them with a pride and show them as the role model for young people in Poland, because they were brave enough to fight for their independence. They sacrificed their life for their freedom. Okay, sorry. How much time do I have?
2 more minutes.
Okay. Let's keep social sciences and. To sum up, we were thinking is there any kind of agonistic memory, and we couldn't find it. And then we realized that there is one possibility that this agonistic memory can be developed somehow. And there is nothing so good to unify a group as common enemy, and now we have this common enemy, and it's very visible in this Lithuanian textbooks, and I'm talking about Russia. And if we are joined and unified by this common enemy, by Russia, we can develop our own agonistic memory. So, thank you.
Problem. Okay, so I just suggest that we collect questions, and you'll probably have time to answer one of them, so you don't have to be very thorough in your answers. You also shouldn't ask too long questions, so please, floor is yours. Yes, Sophie, you were first. Yeah, oh, you need a mic. Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks.
Oh, yeah, I think it's on.
Okay. Yeah? Okay. Thanks, everyone. That was such an interesting panel. I've got lots of questions, but Agnieszka, if I can just ask one. It was great to see the final bit, because I remember you writing about this for the initial literature review. So it's really good to see the publication coming out. But I just wanted to ask a question about the point you said at the end about Russia and having this kind of shared other. And I wondered, is it agonistic memory if there's still a definition of the other?
Okay, so Agnieszka, please do remember about the question, and then there was Małgorzata, and then Christina, okay, Ruzana, Małgorzata, Christina, Arsen. Okay, please.
I have a question to 3 presentations, but all of them, I will ask you to reflect more about agonistic possibilities of what you have been presented. Although in the first case you have tried to bring that, but I will have a question if does it work and what are the limitations for that cases although happened. For the presentation of around monuments in war situation, yes, I would like to see what would be your reflection around agonistic approach in this tragedy or in this war situation. And for Agnieszka, although you didn't find any agonistic cases, but like they could happen if you have possibility or policy to create like new textbooks. But I would like to ask you what are the policies toward textbook creation in Poland and how it is possible.
Okay, was it Małgorzata? Do you want to ask a question? No. No. Okay, so now it's Christina and then Arsen.
Yes, so this is a kind of question, comment, or a kind of possible way for further reflection on agonism in all these cases, which is to have an agonistic debate or encounter. I think that an agonistic space is needed, so a space in which, like a space of encounter where various visions of the past can meet, and that could be it could be potentially between former enemies or former antagonists, but it could also be just a plural, multivocal way of remembering, which is like everybody's memories can be different, and there are these multiple narratives and stories that come together, and that can be a kind of alternative definition of agonism. So I think that Agnieszka, the textbooks are generally, I just thought that, is that not the case that the textbook is really designed for students to learn a version, and it is very rare in a system of education that you give the option that they can interpret and have like a discussion in the classroom. So I think that unless, and maybe more at university level, but in my, maybe I went to school a long time ago, maybe, but in my lifetime, it was school time. It was not really up for debate how we would interpret the past, but there would be like one version that the National Ministry of Education decided that this will be the version we will be taught. I passed my A-levels in 1990, and we didn't study any after Second World War history, because they were still deciding whether 56 was a revolution or an anti-revolution, and the new version was under elaboration in that year. So that's an example. Yeah, so I think that, this is maybe also worth thinking about in all the cases, the street art case and the theater performance case. So I think that the Street Mush really created a kind of space where different countries and different ethnicity participants could, that was really like an exceptional temporary space created for people who would never meet otherwise to discuss these memories. While I think that it's interesting to see how in the case that was created here, there was a space where it was maybe cosmopolitan in a way and not necessarily agonistic, but maybe we could interpret this as a sort of agonism if we accept that this was like a plurivocal, multiple oral histories coming together, but allowing different versions maybe to be developed. So I don't know if this comment somehow makes sense for thinking it further.
Thank you so much, Arsen.
I have a question, Misha Gabovich, very interesting presentation. I would like to learn, I read it about monument Catherine the Great, maybe it's Kherson or the other city. What happened? Maybe I mistake, but I remember about that.
Okay. Can we pass? Okay. Yeah, okay. If you, and the number.
For Armenian team, Nelly and Tomasz, yeah, you worked in Armenia. So in this part of Europe where I come from, we got all these discussions, в Литве, на Литве, в Украине, на Украине. Belarus changed its name from Belarus to Belarus. And now when you speak in English, we're saying Nagorny Karabakh. It sounds crazy for me and for my Estonian friends because it's Russian. It's absolutely Russian. We redraw maps of Ukraine by saying Kiev in Ukrainian transliteration instead of Russian, yes, for example, in Lithuania. But and my question is, are there any discussions in Armenia, or anybody cares how to say Nagorno-Karabakh in English? Yeah, or is it absolutely not interesting?
Okay, I'm sorry. Can we collect the question and we'll have that hot discussion at the end? Sorry. It's Amber's turn now.
Yeah, thank you. My question is with Tomasz and Nelly. And it's like coming out of the personal crisis sort of a thing. So I want to reimagine your situation of dealing with the material which you did in your article if you couldn't go to Armenia. So if you couldn't go to Armenia, what would happen then? I mean, how do you tackle with the situation while still doing a comparative, studies? Yeah, at least one of the, if at least one of the participants, one of the colleague couldn't go to the place there. So that's it.
Okay, if that's it, I will just add one more question, and it's also to Lithuanian case, because I've just spent some time on the Lithuanian exhibition, so it was very interesting to me to hear to you, because that's what we see in the museum space, especially, the main official sites, it's very much similar. But I would be also interested in the differences between those three, enemies, interwar enemies, because this is what you can see, at least, I could see, and I was mainly interested in the representation of industry and a development of Vilnius industry through whatever, and the way they present that. And then I had that impression that when they speak about the Polish state, it was kind of the sloppy occupier. It was the one, which under which the Vilnius flourished the least, right? So there are stories of how whatever the Vilnius developed itself in the 19th century under the Russian Empire. So there was a space to do that. Then, Germans were of course super problematic, and at the end they turned out to be very bad. But there were some moments where they were allies, and it is actually presented in the exhibitions. And also when you speak about the industry, they send, the machines work until today. And then the ports were the worst in the terms of, they gave nothing to Vilnius. That was basically my impression after the exhibition. So then, but the general question is about the differences, right? How when they speak about and the on the hierarchies between the enemies of the interwar republic. Okay, that's it. So now we have time to answer the questions. Can I suggest the same order as you had the presentation? I guess you did have the big question about agonism, right? In your case, do you have a mic?
It is on. Great. Shall I have a go first? So thank you, Christina, for that comment. That is an excellent summary of the findings of our paper, better than I could have done. So yes, I agree. But I just wanted to come to Rosanna's question there about, does agonism work? Is it a recipe? I think largely through working on this paper, I don't know how my co-authors feel about it, I wouldn't frame the question in that way. I think that agonism can be effective in certain circumstances as a strategic approach, just as much as more consensus-driven cosmopolitan approaches can be strategically effective in particular circumstances. I think it's another kind of mode in the toolkit. And the purpose of doing this kind of work is to think about contexts in which one mode or another might produce different or kind of more interesting results. What I found really interesting about the Moosh case is that because in terms of like the history of kind of memory theory, agonistic memory comes later, there's a tendency, and I've seen this with other scholars, to think, well, it's kind of like an evolution. You start off with your agonistic memory, and then you move on to some kind of cosmopolitan consensus, and then you're kind of, ready to move to a more advanced stage of agonistic memory. This case proves that that is not, in fact, the case empirically, because what we had there was a group of people coming together under immensely pressured circumstances, huge distrust. If you get access to the documentary, which shows the discussions between the participants in that project, almost everything anybody said, even in passing, was subject to scrutiny, criticism, it's immense kind of wariness. But it was actually the fact that the project created a space in which everybody could express their own relationship to the historical kind of events that were being talked about, that sort of made the work together possible in a way that I think it wouldn't have been possible if everybody had had to sign up to a single kind of consensus. That project would have broken apart almost immediately, I think, if that had been the case. But I don't know how my fellow authors feel about that. Do you want to add anything there?
Can I add something? Can I add something about, I think, when we went into working on these pieces, we didn't expect this outcome at all. I thought at the beginning that there was much more potential for agonism in the chronicles than in Sweet Moosh, until we discovered the documentary. With the chronicles, the potential is there for agonism, but it's not happening at the moment because it doesn't make sense. There's enough to battle against already in Poland. So the strength of the chronicles at the moment is this shared language, is this consensus, I think. So yeah, I think that the findings definitely took me by surprise, which was wonderful. I don't know if you want to add anything.
To kind of stress what David said about this struggle and amazing to witness the process of the participants of the Moosh project, because the only consensus that they came to is that the memory of the genocide matters, but the struggle was for each of the participants to define why and how it matters to them personally. So for Armenians, it was, this traumatic past that they have to face, and the process of, finding their identity in it. And for the Turkish participants, there's this amazing moment in the documentary when one of them stands up and is saying that it is important for him to acknowledge the genocide, but he's doing it because he believes in a free Turkey society, and this is a part of it. Like his fight for sex minority rights or the freedom of speech. And this is the moment when the discussion turns, and the individual approaches to that are coming up and are visible. And this is a very, also, I think, agonistic moment, yes? Because each and every one of them has this single personal voice in that.
Thank you. Nelly, Tomek, I don't know who'd like to start.
Thank you for all of the questions. So I would maybe firstly add up to what has been already said about agonism. So in our case, the Armenian case, what we found were actually maybe not spaces, but spots, right? Like the post-war butterflies and other examples of initiatives looking for alternatives were more of a spots with agonistic potential than spaces where like things happened continuously and repeatedly, right? So maybe this shows like how difficult is the situation of agonistic initiatives in such a polarized, politically polarized and difficult context when there is a military conflict underway, when there is an aggression of Azerbaijan towards Armenia, and when there is this situation, because the war situation always attaches us so strongly to the here and now. Like, what is here and now? Here and now we have enemies, here and now we have fightings, here and now we have refugees and the need to maintain, to mourn our victims and all these things. So in this heavy political context, agonism is very pushed out of the picture, out of the mainstream, and it's difficult to imagine how it could work here and now. But still, why we need agonism and why we need to keep and preserve these spots and support them and help them to develop, this is because despite all the heavy situations, we need to try to think in the longer term, right? Because like now there's war, there are victims, there are killings, but still there's some hope for the long future, like better future in the longer term, in the longer perspective, needs to be preserved. And in this sense, for this future, we need not only practices which are focused on here and now, but on here and now, so on mobilizing populations, on closing national borders, but we also need to think that in the long run, those practices which open the borders, which try to build the bridges again, are also very needed and very. So this is why we need to support them today, even if they are not the very spaces, but only maybe small spots, but they're still bright spots and they're still very valuable and with a chance to grow in the future. This is why we need to look at them and support them today. So that was about agonism. And the two questions, one to Rustis. So the English version, like the dominant use of the name is Nagorno-Karabakh. It's in English language, right? It's not Russian. Like, I mean, in Russian it's Nagorny Karabakh. Nagorny Karabakh. Nagorno. Yes. And Armenians use the word Artsakh, right? Artsakh. Yes. So the noise was about Artsakh. And the question of Umber. So we basically did this research on like 2 levels. Maybe it was not very explicitly articulated in the presentation, but one level was like the fieldwork interviews with street artists, which we made our primary data, primary source. And the second was visual analysis, right? So hypothetically, if we were not in the field, we could still like conduct the visual analysis, because the visuals obviously are things which you collect during your fieldwork, but you can easily like access them and collect them and systematize and analyze using different internet sources and using also authors' private archives if you have access to them like digitally. So it would be half of a research if we didn't go to the field to conduct the fieldwork, but it would still be something interesting. And Nelly, would you like to add something?
I'll be very short, and we'll start with your question, Dr. Umber. So I believe that we could totally fail, because doing interviews where, I mean, the empirical data was based on basically on these interviews. So, Christina, thank you very much for your question. In Polish case, you must be, I mean, the important thing is that whom you address this question to. Like, if we are talking about official narratives, this highly institutionalized procedure on making and creating and financing murals. So here, perhaps we see this transformation from victimhood state to glorification of heroism. But here you cannot see and define some specific enemy, like some face of enemy. But these grants, bottom-up initiatives like this Legia football fan guys, etc. So in this case, those murals are still being this more antagonistic, and I don't know if Tomek will agree or not, but yes. So yeah, and I think this much.
Mina?
Okay. No,
Thanks.
okay,
So thanks a lot about the question, for the question about the uses of agonism in this conflict situation. So I have to say that I'm actually very skeptical about the purchase of the concept in our case, because I think that in all the cases where people tend to speak of agonism and agonistic approaches are post-conflict situations. So situations when people are speaking about the memory of a conflict that's already, at least in some ways, in the past. We are speaking about an ongoing war where, in agonism, I think the idea is that people at least accept each other's right to existence, which is precisely not the case in the Russian invasion of Ukraine, right? So the whole thing is premised on the idea that Ukraine has no right to exist. And in this case, to speak of agonism, I think would be misplaced. Now, what I didn't show you is the whole part that we have about what's been happening in free Ukraine. And of course, in response to the invasion, there's been a new wave of iconoclasm all over Ukraine, which targets mostly monuments of all kinds, including, by the way, this was one of the questions, the monument to Catherine the Great, not in Kherson, but in Odessa, which was removed in December 2022. There was never a monument in Kherson, even though the Russians actually had plans to build one. So the Ukrainian iconoclasm has targeted monuments to the Russian imperial presence, monuments to Russian cultural figures, but also in some cases, some monuments to war memorials. And in order to make sense of this, instead of speaking about agonism, we use the concept of decentering, which was introduced into this discussion by the Ukrainian artist and writer Yevgeny Belarusets. Because when you talk about agonism, for me, that's something that kind of stays on the political symbolic level, right? You have, speaking of monuments, for example, you have one monument which one person can approach through one interpretive lens, and the other person in a different interpretive lens. One person has one historical narrative associated with the monument, and another person has another. And this, of course, is part of the complex. But in addition to these political and symbolic levels, you also have other levels on which people experience monuments, and we identify the historical and preservationist level. So does this monument have some historic value beyond what it ostensibly represents? Then the artistic value. Sometimes there are monuments that are artistically interesting, even though we can no longer identify with or approve of what they ostensibly stand for. And then perhaps most importantly, there's the habitual value, right? So people are used to monuments in their everyday lives. And people very often feel nostalgic even about Lenin monuments, not because they feel any sort of association or connection with Lenin, the political figure, but because this is where their first kiss took place. This is where, a place that they passed on their way to work every day, etc., etc. So I don't think that you can really make sense of these different levels through the framework of agonism, which is why we speak of decentering, which is the idea that you can have different perspectives, not just different kind of narrative understandings, but different lived perspectives or different levels of experience of one and the same monument. I think this is much more appropriate and much more useful for understanding what's been happening with monuments in Ukraine in general. including war memorials.
Thank you so much. So now we'll turn to our last speaker, Agnieszka.
Thank you for your question, and I think that somehow Rosanna's and Christina's questions correspondent to each other, because when I went to school, I also learned this one story in grand narration about the greatness of Polish nation, but then because I really like studying school, and I think it's very interesting. But then I realized that it's not the only way of teaching history. That the history can teach you not only about the history of your nation, but also can teach you very important skill, which is critical thinking. And when we write this report about history teaching at schools, I realize in how many countries this critical thinking is the most important part of history teaching. Of course, it's not the case of Polish schools or Lithuanian schools, but I remember at the very beginning of the 21st century, there were huge debates in Poland that we should start on history lessons, start teaching students thinking critically and analyze sources, analyze different kind of texts. And now I can turn to your question. It used to be like that at the very beginning of the century, at the turn of the 20th and 21st century. Then we start thinking about history not as about national narration, but about this, that we need to develop those skills of critical thinking. But now it is changes because of the political policy and about this very conservative government we have and very conservative ministry. So even if this secondary schools, we do not teach students, we do not teach youngsters how to analyze sources, how to thinking in a critical way, but we teach them how to memorize dates, surnames, events, how to think in the pattern that we want them to think. So it is how it is creates right now, and we can observe it nowadays that this field of freedom is shrinking, is getting smaller. So agonism, I was thinking about it, and I think that this relationship between Poland and Lithuania, when it comes to this agonist term, is changing. And I remember in 1990s, it was the same for Polish historian if they call something a Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth or Lithuania or Poland. It was the same for Polish historians, and this colonial point of view is so dominant and was so obvious for everyone. Now we have this feeling as historians, and I'm sure about it, that we should not call Commonwealth, Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth Poland. So it is changes, and this agonistic way of thinking is coming, and it's not very vivid, but it's somewhere there. But we need, and I think this Russia is very important for us to fasten this process. So sometimes, yes, I think we need this other to make this process more visible. And when it comes to Vilnius, I have no idea, and I will ask my colleagues from Lithuania to answer to Joanna's question.
I think that industrial history and economic history is not really doesn't have its place in Lithuanian historical narrative at all, because being an agricultural country and developing its industry only in the interwar period, when we talk about the independent Lithuania at all, the case of Vilnius is maybe a bit different. And at that particular time, the independent Lithuania made a big progress, but nowadays no one is talking about, I would say. And on the contrary, we have Vilnius region with not making that progress. That's why that story maybe
I'm just referring to a particular museum. Then there is exhibition in Energy and Technology Museum. So there is quite a huge space which tells the story of the industrial Vilnius. So, and this is where you can. It's interesting to see how through the social industrial history, they tell the stories of the different regimes.
It doesn't sound for Lithuania. So industrial Lithuania or industrial Vilnius, it's very hard. And the other thing, social history in Lithuania as well doesn't have place. When we talk about, for example, the workers' movement and that particular time of the end of 19th century, 20th century, even in the Soviet historiography, it was not very present. And nowadays, no one is researching it. We have maybe one dissertation on labor movement in Lithuania in interwar period. Maybe you were analyzing this.
No.
All right. So before we thank the speaker, I just would like to make one organizational arrangement with Veronica, because the people online might wait for the next panel. And when will we start the next panel? We are late only 20 minutes. Okay, so we do that 15 minutes break, and now we can thank the speakers. Thank you. Thanks.